The evening rush at Le Petit Jardin was in full swing. Crystal glasses clanked, expensive perfume filled the air, and the soft murmur of high-stakes business deals floated between tables. Among the chaos, a young waitress moved gracefully between the tables, carrying plates of steaming French cuisine to Manhattan's wealthiest diners. By day, she was just another server in a crisp black uniform, carefully balancing trays and memorizing complicated orders. Her regulars knew her as the quiet girl with gentle eyes who never mixed up their specific requests: extra dressing on the side, gluten-free bread, or wine served at exactly the right temperature. To them, she was just another face in the army of service staff that kept their luxurious dining experiences running smoothly. But every night, long after the last customer had left and the kitchen staff had gone home, something magical happened in the restaurant's dimly lit bar area. As the cleaning crew worked their way through the main dining room, soft piano notes would drift through the empty restaurant. There, sitting at the old baby grand piano that most customers barely noticed, was the same waitress who had served them hours earlier. Her hands, still smelling faintly of dish soap and cleaning spray, would move across the keys with growing confidence. She had been doing this for 5 years now, turning the restaurant's forgotten piano into her own private music school. Her teachers were YouTube tutorials watched on her phone during break times, borrowed music books from the library, and endless hours of practice when nobody was watching. The piano itself had a story. Once the centerpiece of the bar's entertainment, it now served mostly as an expensive piece of decoration. The restaurant's owner had mentioned once that it was too costly to maintain regular live music. Little did he know that his investment was far from wasted. In those quiet hours, she would start with scales and exercises, her fingers running up and down the keys like she had seen in the tutorial videos. Then she would move on to simple pieces, gradually working her way through more challenging compositions. The night cleaning staff had become her first audience, sometimes pausing their work to listen as she practiced. Her journey with music wasn't easy. After working double shifts that left her feet aching and her back sore, most people would head straight home to rest. But she saw something different in those late hours, an opportunity that life had placed right in front of her. The irony wasn't lost on her. Serving meals to people who probably spent more on a single dinner than what a month of proper piano lessons would cost, while she taught herself to play on stolen minutes and borrowed time. She kept a small notebook in her apron pocket, filled with musical notes and terms she'd learned. During slow moments between serving tables, she would practice finger positions on her serving tray, mentally mapping out the pieces she wanted to learn. Her coworkers often caught her tapping rhythms on the kitchen counter while waiting for orders, but they just assumed she was fidgety by nature. The contrast between her two worlds was striking. During service, she was invisible, part of the background that wealthy diners barely noticed as they discussed million-dollar deals over their foie gras and champagne. But in those precious after-hours moments at the piano, she became something else entirely, an artist in training, slowly but surely building her skills one note at a time. What none of her customers knew was that their seemingly ordinary waitress had already mastered several classical pieces. She could play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata well enough to move hearts, and her rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune would have surprised even the most discerning music lover. All this knowledge, gained in the quiet hours when Manhattan's elite were fast asleep in their luxury apartments. As another evening service came to an end, she was already thinking about the new piece she would practice tonight. The restaurant might see her as just another server, but the piano knew different. It knew her as the dedicated student who never missed a night, whose passion for music burned brighter than all the candles on all the tables she served. Music had always been more than just a hobby for her. It was the thread that connected her past to her present. Growing up in a tiny apartment in Queens, she would press her ear against the thin walls, listening to the neighbors' piano lessons drifting through. Every note, every melody became a treasure she stored away in her heart. Her parents had come to America with nothing but hope in their pockets and determination in their spirits. They worked endless hours, her mother at a garment factory, her father juggling two jobs as a delivery driver and night security guard. The sight of their exhausted faces when they came home made her hide her desperate wish for piano lessons. She knew the cost of even one lesson could feed their family for days. Instead, she found creative ways to nurture her passion. The kitchen table became her first piano. While doing homework, she would tap out rhythms she'd heard, imagining black and white keys under her fingertips. She drew a paper keyboard and practiced finger positions until the paper wore thin. During lunch breaks at school, she would sneak into the music room just to be near the real piano, too shy to ask for permission to play it. Her high school music teacher noticed her lingering by the piano one day. "You can touch it, you know," she had said kindly. "It won't break." Those words opened a tiny window of opportunity, 10 precious minutes every lunch break when she could finally feel real keys under her fingers. The teacher showed her middle C, and that single note became the foundation of her secret dream. The restaurant job was supposed to be temporary, just a way to save money for community college while helping her parents with bills. She had picked Le Petit Jardin because it was close to home and the tips were good. The piano in the bar area wasn't even mentioned during her interview. She discovered it during her first closing shift, like finding an unexpected gift waiting just for her. Sometimes, on rare quiet afternoons, she would catch fragments of conversation from the regular customers about their children's piano lessons, their complaints about the cost of private teachers and prestigious music schools. She would listen silently as she refilled their water glasses, mentally taking notes about proper posture and breathing techniques they mentioned. The internet became her teacher. During break times, hunched over her phone in the staff room, she devoured every piano tutorial she could find. She learned about music theory while riding the subway home, memorizing terms like allegro and fortissimo between stops. Her browser history became a testament to her determination. How to read sheet music, piano exercises for beginners, common mistakes self-taught pianists make. Her small apartment still couldn't fit a real piano, but now she had something better. Every night, after her shift ended, she had access to a beautiful instrument that probably cost more than her family's entire yearly income. The irony wasn't lost on her. Serving expensive meals to pay the bills while secretly living out her dream on a piano meant to be purely decorative. She kept her growing skill a secret from everyone, even her parents. They worried enough about her working late hours. She didn't want them to worry about her staying even later to practice. Besides, there was something magical about having this completely private relationship with music, like a special friendship that belonged only to her. The regulars at the restaurant never suspected that the quiet server who brought their coffee had spent countless hours memorizing Chopin's nocturnes, or that her hands, now skilled at carrying heavy trays, could dance across piano keys with growing confidence. They didn't know that every tip they left helped buy another music book, or that their casual conversations about classical music were carefully stored away as lessons. Years passed this way, her skills growing in the shadows of late nights and early mornings. The restaurant's piano became more than just an instrument. It was her confidant, her teacher, her window into a world she dreamed of joining. Every note she played was a step closer to something bigger, even if she wasn't quite sure what that something was yet. That Friday evening started like any other at Le Petit Jardin. The restaurant buzzed with its usual elegant chaos, servers weaving between tables, the kitchen staff calling out orders, and the subtle symphony of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. But tonight was different. The restaurant was hosting its biggest event of the year, a charity gala for the city's most prominent arts patrons. The dining room had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, fresh flowers adorned every table, and a golden glow bathed the room in warm light. The guest list read like a who's who of Manhattan's cultural elite: museum directors, symphony board members, and wealthy philanthropists who kept the city's art scene alive with their generous donations. She was in the middle of arranging place cards when she overheard the manager's phone conversation. His face grew increasingly pale as he listened to the person on the other end. The regular pianist, who had played at the restaurant for over a decade, had fallen ill. No replacement could be found on such short notice. The manager's hands trembled as he ended the call. Live music was a promised feature of the evening's entertainment. The kitchen erupted into quiet panic. Without music, the carefully orchestrated atmosphere would fall flat. The manager paced back and forth, muttering about refunds and reputation damage. She watched from behind a service pillar, her heart racing. For 5 years, she had practiced in secret, playing for nothing but her own joy and the occasional cleaning staff. Now, the piano sat silent when it was needed most. Her hands grew sweaty as she considered speaking up. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she embarrassed herself in front of the city's most influential art lovers? The wealthy guests, who usually barely noticed her existence, would surely remember a disastrous performance. She could lose her job, become a laughingstock, destroy the restaurant's reputation. But something deeper than fear stirred inside her. Every night spent practicing until her fingers ached, every tutorial watched and rewatched, every piece carefully memorized. Hadn't she been unconsciously preparing for a moment like this? The piano that had been her silent friend through countless nights seemed to call to her, offering one chance to step out of the shadows. Taking a deep breath, she approached her manager. He was now frantically scrolling through his phone contacts, hoping to find a last-minute replacement. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the kitchen chaos. He didn't look up. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "Sir, I can play." The manager finally looked at her, confusion clear on his face. For a moment, he seemed to have trouble connecting her. The quiet server, who had worked there for years, with the solution to his current crisis. "You play piano?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Several nearby staff members stopped what they were doing, turning to watch the exchange. "Yes," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I've been practicing on the piano here after hours. I know many classical pieces. I can help." The manager's expression shifted from confusion to desperate hope, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. He glanced at his watch. The guests would arrive in less than an hour. "Show me," he said simply, gesturing toward the piano in the bar area. She walked over, acutely aware of the eyes following her movement. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight, her hands too stiff. The familiar walk to the piano, one she had made hundreds of times in solitude, now felt like walking on a tightrope. Sitting down at the piano, she closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage. The keys felt different under the bright lights, with people watching. But as soon as her fingers touched them, something magical happened. The years of secret practice took over. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the air, clear and confident. The kitchen noise gradually died away. Servers stopped mid-task, turning to look at the source of the music. The manager's tense expression slowly relaxed into wonder. She played on, losing herself in the music just as she had done so many times before in the quiet of night. For those few minutes, she wasn't a server anymore. She was simply a musician, sharing her art with the world for the first time. When the final notes faded away, the silence that followed felt electric. The manager stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. A slow smile spread across his face, relief and amazement mixing in his expression. "Well," he said softly, "it looks like we found our pianist for the evening." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. The manager quickly helped her switch her serving apron for a simple black jacket kept in the staff room for emergencies. Her comfortable work shoes would have to do. There was no time to change those. Her coworkers watched in amazement as she transformed from their fellow server into the evening's entertainment. "The guests will start arriving in 30 minutes, the manager said, checking his watch for the 100th time. "Can you play for that long? Do you know enough pieces?" His voice carried equal measures of hope and worry. She nodded, her mind already running through her mental catalog of music. All those hours of practice were about to be put to the ultimate test. The sous chef, who had always been kind to her, brought her a glass of water and placed it carefully on the piano. "You've got this," he whispered, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. Other staff members offered encouraging smiles as they rushed to complete their preparations for the evening. The cleaning lady, who had often been her only audience during late-night practice sessions, gave her a knowing wink. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her sheet music, the few precious pieces she had carefully saved up to buy, plus others she had printed from free online sources. The pages were worn from countless nights of practice, some corners dog-eared, with her own notes scribbled in the margins. These papers represented years of dedication, and now they would help guide her through the most important performance of her life. The first guests began to arrive, and she started playing softly, light classical pieces that could float above conversation without overwhelming it. Her body felt tense at first, aware of the occasional curious glances from arriving patrons. These were people who regularly attended symphony halls and opera houses. They would know if she made a mistake. A small group gathered near the piano, champagne glasses in hand. She recognized them as regular customers, ones who had never looked twice at her when she served their meals. Now they watched her fingers move across the keys, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid that making eye contact might break her concentration. One particularly difficult passage in Mozart's Sonata No. 11 approached, a section that had given her trouble during practice. Her heart raced as she neared it. In the past, alone at night, she could simply stop and try again if she made a mistake. Now, there would be no second chances. Taking a deep breath, she let muscle memory take over. Her fingers found each note perfectly, and she felt a small surge of pride. The room filled quickly, the gentle murmur of conversation mixing with her music. She moved smoothly from piece to piece, just as she had practiced countless times. The difference was that now, instead of playing for empty tables and stacked chairs, she was performing for some of the most cultured music lovers in the city. A waiter, one who had just started working at the restaurant last week, approached the piano between pieces. "There's someone here," he whispered, "a really important guest. He's asking about you." Her stomach tightened, but she kept playing, letting the music calm her nerves just as it had done so many times before. From the corner of her eye, she could see the restaurant manager talking animatedly with a distinguished-looking man near the bar. They both kept glancing in her direction. She recognized the man from newspaper photos. He was the director of one of the city's most prestigious music schools. Her fingers almost faltered at this realization, but she forced herself to focus on the keys beneath them. The next piece she chose was Debussy's Clair de Lune, one she had practiced more than any other. As she played the opening notes, she remembered all those nights alone at this very piano, dreaming of a moment when she could share her music with others. The piece had become part of her soul, and now, finally, she could let it soar. The gentle masterpiece filled the room, and she felt the atmosphere shift. Conversations quieted. More people gathered near the piano. For the first time that evening, she felt truly confident. Not because of the attention, but because she knew this piece as well as she knew her own heartbeat. Every note, every phrase, every subtle change in tempo came naturally, flowing from her fingers like water. As the evening progressed, something remarkable began to happen. The line between singer and musician started to blur, then disappeared entirely. The same hands that had carried countless plates now commanded attention with every note they played. The piano, once her secret companion, had become her partner in a beautiful public dance. The charity gala was in full swing, with waiters gliding between tables serving elaborate French dishes. She could smell the familiar aromas of the kitchen's finest offerings: perfectly seared scallops, rich wine sauces, and freshly baked bread. Just hours ago, she would have been the one carrying those plates. Now she was creating the soundtrack for this elegant evening. Her repertoire flowed naturally, each piece chosen to match the mood of the room. During dinner, she played softer, melodic pieces that wouldn't overshadow conversations. As coffee and desserts appeared, she transitioned to more passionate compositions. Her fingers remembered every practice session, every mistake corrected, every moment spent studying YouTube tutorials on her phone during break times. A small crowd had formed around the piano, growing larger as the evening wore on. These weren't the polite, disinterested glances she'd expected. These were the focused expressions of true music lovers who had discovered something unexpected and extraordinary. She could hear whispers of appreciation between pieces, see phones discreetly recording her performance. The music school director had moved closer to the piano, watching her technique with obvious interest. She noticed him studying her hands, nodding slightly at her phrasing choices. During a brief pause between pieces, she heard him talking with another guest, completely self-taught. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. One elderly woman approached the piano, her eyes glistening with tears. "Dear," she said softly, "could you play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor?" It was a challenging piece, one she had spent months perfecting during her midnight practice sessions. Without hesitation, she began to play, her confidence growing with each measure. The woman closed her eyes, swaying slightly to the music, transported by the melody. The restaurant manager stood near the bar, beaming with pride as though he had discovered her talent himself. Other staff members found excuses to pass by the piano, offering encouraging smiles or quickly squeezing her shoulder as they walked past. The kitchen staff peeked through the service doors whenever they could, their familiar faces now showing a new kind of respect. Time seemed to flow differently at the piano. Pieces she had practiced hundreds of times felt new again, played for appreciative ears instead of empty chairs. Each note carried the weight of her journey. Every late night, every missed social event, every moment spent studying music instead of resting after long shifts. Between pieces, she caught fragments of conversations around her. Where did she study? Which conservatory? Have you heard anything like this recently? The questions made her smile inwardly, thinking of her real musical education. YouTube videos watched on a cracked phone screen, borrowed books from the library, and countless hours of solitary practice. A young girl, probably around 12, watched her play with undisguised wonder. The girl's parents were deep in conversation with other guests, but she stood transfixed by the piano, her eyes following every movement. In that moment, she saw herself at that age, dreaming of touching piano keys, but never having the chance. She chose her next piece with the girl in mind, a lively, enchanting composition that made the young observer's eyes light up. As the evening drew to a close, she played one final piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was the first complex piece she had mastered, practiced so many times that it lived in her muscles and bones. The room grew quiet, the spell of the music drawing everyone in. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the prestigious audience or their opinions. She was thinking about her journey, from the paper keyboard she'd drawn as a child to this moment, performing for some of the city's most discerning music lovers. The last notes hung in the air like stars, bright and beautiful. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the applause began, not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. The young girl near the piano clapped so hard her bracelets jingled. The elderly woman wiped tears from her eyes. The music school director was already making his way toward her, business card in hand. The morning after the gala, everything changed. She woke up to her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. Videos of her performance had spread across social media overnight, capturing the imagination of thousands. The clips showed her in her borrowed jacket, playing with such passion that viewers couldn't believe she was the restaurant's waitress turned pianist. One video in particular had gone viral. The moment when she played Rachmaninoff's Prelude, her hands flying across the keys, while still wearing her practical work shoes. The comments section overflowed with amazement. From serving tables to serving pure magic. This is what raw talent looks like. Someone get this girl a scholarship. The restaurant's phone lines were flooded with calls. People wanted to know when she would play again. Regular customers who had never noticed her during their meals now claimed they had always seen something special in her. The local news stations began calling, eager to tell the story of the Waitress pianist who had captivated the city's elite. Her coworkers treated her differently now, but not in the way she had feared. There was no jealousy or resentment. Instead, they shared in her joy, proud to have been part of her secret journey. The cleaning staff who had been her first audience told reporters about the dedication they had witnessed night after night, year after year. A small local news crew arrived at the restaurant to interview her. The reporter wanted to know everything. How she had learned, why she had kept it secret, what she planned to do next. She told them about the paper keyboard she had drawn as a child, about watching YouTube tutorials during her breaks, about practicing until her fingers ached. Her story wasn't just about music anymore. It had become a symbol of hidden dreams and quiet persistence. The elderly woman from the gala night returned to the restaurant, this time during the day. She brought with her a gift, a book of classical sheet music that had belonged to her own mother. Music should be passed down, she said, her eyes kind, from one generation of dreamers to another. The pages were yellowed with age, but filled with handwritten notes from past players. A legacy of learning she could now continue. The young girl who had watched her so intently at the gala convinced her parents to bring her back to the restaurant. This time, she brought her own beginning piano book, asking for advice. Looking at the girl's eager face, she remembered her own childhood longings. She spent her break time showing the girl how to position her hands, just as she had learned from countless online videos. Social media couldn't get enough of her story. People shared their own dreams in the comments, artistic passions they pursued in secret, talents they were afraid to show the world. Her journey had struck a chord with anyone who had ever felt their dreams were too big, too late, or too impossible. The music school director's business card hadn't just been a polite gesture. He called the restaurant the next day, asking to meet with her. Over coffee in the quiet morning hours before her shift, he talked about potential and opportunity. The school had a special scholarship program, he explained, for exceptional cases, talents that couldn't be ignored, regardless of their background or formal training. Local businesses began reaching out, offering support. A formal wear shop wanted to gift her proper performance attire. A small music store offered free access to their practice rooms. A coffee shop near the music school promised her free coffee for a year if she enrolled. The community had embraced her, turning her solo journey into a symphony of support. Her parents finally learned the truth when they saw her on the morning news. Her mother cried, remembering how she used to tap rhythms on their kitchen table. Her father recalled the paper keyboard, now understanding why she had kept it long after it had worn thin. They felt guilty for not being able to afford lessons, but she showed them the videos of her playing, proof that their daughter had found her way to music despite every obstacle. The restaurant manager, who had taken a chance on her that crucial night, now proudly displayed a photo of her at the piano. She practiced here every night, he would tell customers, turning this piano from decoration into destiny. He offered her a new position, server by day, weekend performer by night, with time off to pursue her studies if she chose that path. 2 years passed like a beautiful piece of music, each moment building upon the last. The girl who once served plates now sat before a grand piano on the prestigious Lincoln Center stage, preparing for her first solo recital. The journey from restaurant server to concert pianist hadn't been easy, but every challenge had made the melody of her life richer. The scholarship had opened doors she never imagined possible. Her first day at music school, she had felt out of place among students who had been playing since they could walk. But her years of self-teaching had given her something unique, a raw passion and creativity that couldn't be taught. Her professors often said she played with both technical skill and genuine emotion, a combination that touched hearts. Looking out from backstage, she saw familiar faces filling the front rows. There was the elderly woman who had gifted her the vintage sheet music, now proudly telling anyone who would listen about the night she first heard the waitress play Rachmaninoff. The young girl from the gala sat with her family, clutching a recital program, her own piano lessons now inspired by this living proof that dreams come true. Her former coworkers had come too, taking a rare night off from the restaurant. The sous chef who had brought her water that first night, the cleaning staff who had been her silent audience for years, even the new servers who knew her only from the framed photo by the piano. They were all there. The restaurant manager sat front and center, having closed the restaurant early to bring the entire staff to her performance. Her parents, who had worked extra shifts to buy her first proper performance dress, now sat in the audience wearing their finest clothes. Their faces showed a mixture of pride and amazement, still not quite believing that their daughter, who once played on a paper keyboard, was about to perform at Lincoln Center. The journey had transformed them too, showing them that sometimes the biggest dreams are the ones most worth believing in. In the audience were also faces she had served countless times at the restaurant, people who had once looked past her as just another server. Now they were here as supporters, some having contributed to a community fund that helped cover her music school expenses. They had become part of her story, proof that sometimes life's greatest champions can come from the most unexpected places. As she walked onto the stage, her footsteps echoing in the hushed concert hall, she thought about that old piano in the restaurant's bar area. It still stood there, but it was no longer just decoration. The restaurant had started a small music program, offering practice time to young students who couldn't afford their own pianos. Her story had opened the door for other hidden talents to emerge. The first piece she would play was the same one she had practiced so many times after closing shifts, Chopin's Nocturne. But now, sitting before hundreds instead of empty chairs, the piece held new meaning. Every note carried the weight of her journey, the long nights of practice, the courage to speak up when opportunity knocked, the support of strangers who became family. Her hands touched the keys, and the music began to flow. She played with all the passion of her late-night practice sessions, all the joy of discovery, all the dreams that had lived in her heart since childhood. The piece soared through the concert hall, touching everyone who heard it with its story of persistence and triumph. During the standing ovation that followed her performance, tears glistened in many eyes. Her former customers now stood beside her former coworkers, applauding together. The young girl who had watched her at the gala jumped to her feet, clapping with pure joy. Her parents held each other, overwhelmed with emotion. As she took her final bow, a sense of completion washed over her. The journey from serving tables to standing on this stage had been extraordinary, but it wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever dared to dream, everyone who had practiced in secret, everyone who had waited for their moment to shine. Walking off stage, she remembered something the cleaning lady had once told her during those late-night practice sessions. When you love something enough, the world finds a way to help you succeed. Looking back at the standing ovation, she knew those words had come true. Her music had transformed not just her life, but had touched countless others, proving that sometimes the most beautiful symphonies begin with a single, courageous note.